I'm just waiting to 1/2 past. Those of you who've done trainings with me know what I'm like. Hey, welcome everybody to our first Q&A session. I'm Michael Paterson, clinical psychologist based in Belfast and EMDR Institute trainer, also EMDR Europe accredited senior trainer. I decided to have this question and answer session to help bring you folks on in terms of your EMDR practice. The floor will be open in just a moment for you to ask any sort of general questions about EMDR therapy. Where there are case-specific questions, what I would like you to do is, if you're able to ask the question in a way which would be more general for situations where such and such might happen, because we don't want to treat this as a case supervision, but certainly guidance on how to handle a situation that's maybe arisen for you a few times. So the floor will be open. You can put your hand up, or some people might be tempted to more put a question into the chat, which we will answer as well. I'm recording this session. There's a few people who had said that they aren't able to attend. They would have signed up like yourselves. So I decided to record it to make it available to them, but also for yourselves as well to view again, to hear things that you might actually have missed, or you might be writing feverishly whenever I've gone on and said something else and you didn't get that point written down. So I will send you a link for the recording after the training as well. Not training, Q&A, sorry. Okay, so I'll open the floor just now. Has somebody got a question that's been sitting at the back of your mind and that you're burning to ask and you want to break the ice? Yes, Mary.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you again.
You too.
My question is around, say for somebody who, I have a client like this, but just making it generalized, who wants a closer connection to spiritual side, right? He's quite spiritual and all that. And he feels like he believes in everything, but he can't feel that connection. Like he can't feel it. He can know it in his head level, but not feel it sort of viscerally or you know what I mean? That like he says, like say something like, you know, we're all God, we're all one part of the one God, but it doesn't really feel like a little bit of a disconnect. And then also feel like there's a bit of a disconnect. He's had it in his life with his family as well, children growing up and things like that. But I was asking about beliefs, and he was like saying, I'm not worthy or I'm not good enough. And then I was trying to do some flow backs, and it doesn't seem to, he can't come upon anything that would be a block, because he fully believes everything he believes. He just doesn't feel it. So does that make sense?
It does. Now, when a client comes in and they say, I have a belief, but I can't feel it, I'd be thinking, so what has happened in the past that has led to this person having this difficulty in the here and now? And if taking the client's history, we may be able to find out there's an underlying belief of personal defectiveness. So whenever that's ringing present in the here and now, and I can make the assumption that it goes further back, way back into childhood as well. And one of the things I'll be exploring with the client, this feeling, have you ever been able to feel at all, or has it happened in more recent times, such as following a particular experience? So if it has followed a particular experience, then that could be the client being hypo-aroused, not connecting to affect that's there, and that could be the way of coping. An example of that might be somebody who, let's say in a relationship, they have been subjected to domestic violence. And as a result of that, they've closed down emotionally. But that's their way of survival. And in this particular relationship, then trying to survive, trying to cope, the children who need their mother then aren't receiving that input from mom because she's closed down emotionally in order to survive that. So with a client generally then, if they're closed down, was there a time that they were able to feel? And if there wasn't, they've always felt not connected, they're kind of numb. And then I'm thinking, okay, what has happened that feeds into this negative self-belief that's there? I may be able to get a detailed history from the client, or maybe not. It just depends on how accessible those early memories are for them. The client may report, I've got no memory before age 14, or no memory of anything that happened in childhood, good or bad. And that's suggesting to me that the client on a continuum of complexity isn't at the healthy end up here. They'll be further down towards this more complex end. And clients who would be on the continuum of complexity from about here to here would generally be able to access their past memories. They'll be reasonably well resourced, and you could identify the target plan and then just work through it with reasonably minimal preparation phase work. But the further down the continuum of complexity we go, the much longer we will be spending in the preparation phase, trying to create that stability for the client. Now, where the client hasn't got these early life memories, I'd be thinking that the child part of them would have gone through a difficult time. And if they're able to access an image in their mind of what that child looks like, we could ask them to access it, bring up a picture of the child, notice how the child's dressed, hairstyle, posture, look in the child's face as well. And we could ask the client, from that look in the child's eyes, what do you feel it is that that child needs? So from that point of view, it allows the client to be introspective and give us an idea of what the child might actually need. I suppose if I throw out a general question to you, if you think about the child that has gone through periods of neglect, abuse of different sorts, and closed down and not able to access those memories, what do you think the child that went through that might actually need? What's missing for the child that didn't happen?
Love.
So, say again, Lorna?
Love.
Yes, love, indeed, absolutely. So the child didn't get love, probably didn't get any hugs at all, or very few. So then what we can do is invite the client, as they're sitting in front of us, to, let's say the child needs love. Well, could you, the grown-up, give that child some love? And if the client says, yes, I could. So just see yourself sitting down beside that little boy, little girl, saying to that child the things that you know they need to hear. So we can allow the client to do that. Now, you may want to try slow bilateral stimulation as you do that, this sort of pace, perhaps even tapping. They could be tapping themselves left, right, that sort of pace. Short set, and then just check, how's the child responding? He's listening or she's listening. And have you more to say? Yes, I have. Okay, let me know when you're finished. Again, slow bilateral stimulation. And how's the child responding to that? Listened. He listened. And have you said all you needed to? Yes, I have. And as you see that little boy or little girl now, is there anything else you feel they would need? Well, yes, they would need a hug. And could you, the grown-up, give that hug? I could. So hold that little boy or little girl close to you. How does it feel for you? So I'm testing the water here with the client to see, is the client comfortable with that? That feels okay. And how's the little girl responding to that? Just snuggling in. That's good. So just hold her close, giving her that hug. And again, the slow bilateral stimulation, set about there and back, maybe 4 to 8. And how's she responding to that? She's enjoying it. She's relaxing. I can feel her body settling. Okay, is it still okay for you? Yes, it is. Do another set. Sort of pace. And how's that for the little girl now? She's really settled. Now, if things are going really well with that, I would push my luck a wee bit further. And I would suggest to the client, what I would like you to do now is draw that little girl closer in to you and allow her to blend with you and become part of you. And just let me know when she has become totally part of you. And slow bilateral stimulation. 7.6. And what's happening with the little girl blending with you now? She's part of me. And where do you feel she is? I feel her here. Just notice that. Do another set. And that can be very powerful because it allows your client, as they are now, to connect that child frozen in time. Imagine the child just frozen here with the particular emotions that the child felt, feeling alone, unwanted, put upon, and the client as the adult connecting with the child and starting to meet the child's needs, blending the child with them and bringing the child with them into the present. That's when it goes swimmingly well. But of course, it doesn't always go swimmingly well with our clients, does it? We've all been there. Now, if you think about saying to the client, and what does the child need? Love. And could you, growing up, give that child love? No, I can't go near her, or I can't go near him. The reason being, the client has learned that that child is dirt under everybody else's shoe. That's what they believe about themselves, isn't it? And if that's the case, well, there's no point in me trying to get the client to meet the child's needs because they're not ready or able to do that. So do I just say, okay, that's enough for today, let's pack it in and then off you go? Or do I try a different strategy? Well, what I'm doing is trying to knock on the front door to go in through the front door. But if the front door is not open to me, well, what would be the obvious thing to do? If you were trying to get in through your own front door and you couldn't get in there, what would you do?
Go in the back door.
Exactly, Mary. And I would do the same as well. So that's what we try and do with the client. We try and find another way in. And I would say to the client then, well, can you think about somebody you know, a reality or maybe a character from a movie or a book who could give that child the love that he or she needs? And the client may think about Mrs. Smith, who lived 2 doors down when they were growing up. Or maybe they might come up with a character that they know from a movie or a book who's very caring or loving. A number of my clients have come up with Mrs. Weasley from Harry Potter. Another client related to the mother from Elf, that movie, Elf. And so then this is a maternal type figure, somebody who would give care and attention and love to that little boy or little girl. We can invite in then the like of Mrs. Weasley or Mrs. Smith from 2 doors down and have Mrs. Smith say to the child the things that that child needs to hear. Our client as the adult is present, listening to this and seeing that the child isn't the ogre that they believed that the child was. And there's Mrs. Smith, who our client holds in esteem, being able to meet the child's needs. So by doing that, then we could allow the client then to become part of this, especially if we've got Mrs. Smith or Mrs. Weasley giving the child a hug. And how would you feel about sliding your arm around the little boy at the same time? The client might say, okay. Or they might say, no, I can't. It's okay. How would you feel about just putting your hand on top of the little boy's hand while Mrs. Weasley is giving the child the hug? I don't know about that. How about just gently touch the child's hand, just once like that, and see how it goes? Oh, all right. So that way I'm trying to see what the client is ready for. And they might just be ready to just listen. It might be a case of, okay, I'll try touching the child's hand. So how was that once they've tried it? It was okay. And what did that little boy do whenever you touched his hand? He smiled at me. Oh, so do you think he liked it? I think maybe he did. Well, what about this time, just putting your hand on top of the little boy's hand, just for 1 second, and notice how he responds. So let me know when you've done that. I've done it now. And how did the little boy respond? He smiled at me again. Oh, that sounds good. What about this time just gently stroking the child's hand just once and see what happens? See how it feels for him, see how it feels for you. You've done it. And how did that feel? It was okay. Oh, if it was okay for you, the child was, that little boy was okay with it, what about you just starting to stroke that little boy's hand while Mrs. Weasley is hugging the little boy? Oh, okay. So then as they're doing that, you could add in the slow bilateral stimulation. So they're running this mental movie of doing it. So they could be tapping just slowly left, right, left, right, left, right, as they're doing that. Now, as the child starts to settle with that, then we may then, if things, with a fair wind and good luck and good fortune, then we may invite the client then to try sliding their arm around the little boy. Now, could this happen in one session? Possibly. Could it take 2 sessions? Yeah. Could it take 3? Yeah. Could it take 6? Depending on where the client is on this continuum of complexity and how responsive they are. But what we're aiming to do is allow the client, as the adult, to connect to more adaptive information. So first of all, as the adult, connecting to the child, trying to meet the child's needs, maybe even blend the child with them. So if they do that, you're creating an adaptive experience for them, and it's being stored as an adaptive memory network. If they can't do it themselves, you're inviting them to tap into a character who they know, Mrs. Smith from Two Doors Down, or the character from the movie or the book. That's something adaptive as well. Bring that resource in and then connect to the child, starting to meet the child's needs and have our client involved. So it becomes an adaptive experience for them that way too. So, and the reason that I'm talking about building up adaptive experiences for our client is for the healing to occur, adaptive experiences must be present and accessible for them in order for the reprocessing to occur later on. So that's why for clients who are down here on the continuum of complexity, they tend to lack resources. And that's why we have to spend more time working with them to build up resources and creating more stability and widening the window of tolerance for them. So where the client still may have gaps in memory, for example, and it could be closed down, then I could be then working with different parts of the personality to do that. And we could invite in, by inviting in the child part, then that is a particular part that we're working with, trying to do some healing there. There may be protective parts that are there, protector parts, and we could access those. Now, we don't have time in this 1 hour session to go into a lot of detail about that, but it is a workshop that I've run in the past, and I will be running one later this year as well. Working with more complex clients. I think I sent you details last week of a workshop that I'm running on the 19th of April, but working with complex clients. So, so do keep that in mind, because that could get you thinking about working in a lot more detail and creating more stabilization as well. Okay. So I was trying to answer that as a general question, Mary, but yes, a lot of your question was a specific case related. So I was trying to get a general answer. But if the client is not able to access, then let's say they're not able to access feelings. So in order to be able to feel something, then we could be inviting the client then to notice the temperature of the room where they are. Because if they're not feeling anything, well, what's the temperature like in the room here? It's warm. Do you notice your bladder? Do you need to go to the toilet? Yeah, I do. So then they're starting to feel things that way too. You could be asking them to be mindful when they're out and about. So, for example, if they go for a walk and they put on headphones and listen to the radio or rock music or whatever it might be, invite them to take the headphones off and then walk, being mindful of what's around them. Like a day like today in Belfast, the sun's been shining, but it's about 4 degrees. So it's actually quite cool. So you'd feel that sort of temperature, the coolness in your face. If there's a breeze, being aware of that. I went for a walk on Sunday and I heard birdsong, which was lovely to hear. But I could have been walking with headphones on and not heard that at all. So that way, by noticing their sensation of their feet touching the ground, the temperature, smells that there may be, sounds that there may be as well, it allows the client to be more present and connect to their body and also their emotions as well. As the client starts to feel things, then we could introduce experiencing emotions. in response to particular stimuli. And that way, if the client could start to feel something a bit, even briefly, a brief exposure, then bring them back, then slightly longer exposure, bring them back, slightly longer exposure, and bring them back. That way, it becomes non-threatening to them.
I just, when you say, someone's come into the child, could that be their partner? Could you have their partner do that?
Come in and meet the child.
When you're doing the exercise with the bring in the child, like to hug the child, for example, could that be their present partner who they have a good relationship with?
Could be, because it did say some real life person, but then if the partner comes in and then may treat that, they may see themselves as the adult as wanting to be mothered or cared for that way by their partner, which may not be healthy.
Oh,
so I'd probably be tempted to try and bring an external person in.
Okay.
So maybe a mother figure, but not their partner. Well, that would just be my feeling, Mary, but I wouldn't want to try and put a fly in the ointment.
Yes. Yeah, lovely, great. Thank you very much, Michael.
Thank you, thanks. Any questions arising from Mary's question and what I've said there?
Can I ask a question?
Yes, you can indeed, Alicia.
Just in relation to that, if you are suggesting they either do that themselves or bring somebody in and they kind of say, well, what's the point? That never happened. How might you respond to that? Because that's what I've had in the past.
So have I.
And I wasn't sure whether you explain it from like a psychoeducation perspective, what you've just said about making the information adaptive, or you sort of stay away from that. So just be interested in how you would respond to that.
Certainly, I haven't had that in many years, but have had it in the past, probably at the stage you're at now yourself, Alicia. Whenever I was at that stage, but it didn't happen whenever I tried to bring something positive in. So I would use psychoeducation as here's the rationale for doing this. But what I would tend to do is just try it first of all. And if it works as the adult working with the child, that would be fine. The further down they are on the continuum of complexity, that's whenever you may yes, but, and those different things. So I'll be thinking about, if I'm getting yes, but, then what would be so bad about that? So you could ask that question in those circumstances. What would be so bad about meeting that little boy's needs or little girl's needs? And because she doesn't deserve it. So if I hear that, then I'd be thinking, well, I'm not going to get the client then as the adult to do that. I'll be able to bring in a different person, maybe a character from a movie or a book. And another alternative might be to use like a narrative approach with the client. Tell a story of a child who experienced exactly what the client has experienced. And say to them, well, as you hear that story about that child, what do you think they might need? So in which case then it's not them being introspective to themselves directly, but it's getting in through, well, maybe not even the back door. It could be climbing up the drain pipe and going in through the bathroom window. So then that way they could be more objective rather than thinking that I can't go near that child. But then, oh, a child over there. Oh yes, well that child has had a very rough time. That child would need love and cared for and rescued from that situation. Okay, so if that child would need that, what about the young you that went through those circumstances? Do you think that child, well, I don't know. Well, what would be so bad about that child being rescued and taken out of that situation? Well, I suppose maybe, I don't know. Well, if social services were aware of what was happening to that child, well, let's say that other child, what do you think they would do? They'd take the kid out of there, yeah. And if they were aware of what was happening to the young you, what do you think they would have done? They would have taken me out of there. Oh, let's just imagine that social services are aware and taking the child out of there. So we might even be able to have this imagery of social services rescuing the child, taking them out. Now, if this works, it's the right thing to do. If it doesn't, try a different approach. So it's like testing this, see does it work, And if it does, brilliant. If it doesn't, try something else.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
And sorry, Mike, just a quick follow-up, if you don't mind.
Yes, Mary.
If the person they brought in was like a religious figure, like if they're very spiritual or whatever, is that okay?
I'd be quite happy with that, because that person who's very spiritual may be able to help them connect to the spiritual side of them. I've had a client one time who was sexually abused by so a lad who was involved in the church. He came to her house to teach her guitar and ended up sexually abusing her at age 12, whatever it was. And she had been very much into the church and still had a religious faith, though some people, as you know, will stray away from it, having been abused by somebody within the church. But anyway, I'd said to her about a protector, and so I don't know. So could you protect the, now as an adult, could you protect that child? No. So I explored with her who she might be bringing. I don't know. I said, what about 2 angels? So I thought angels, because given her religious belief, and she said, I'd rather have 4. So that's okay. Let's have 4 angels coming in to protect her. So now the little girl had 4 angels protecting her, and that's now we're getting somewhere. So things started to move forward with that.
Lovely.
So you can be quite creative that way. Again, I ask the client themselves to come up with something. If they can't, knowing my client, or you knowing your client with the strong faith, you could suggest somebody for somebody who's into spirituality who would epitomize that for them. Perhaps for some might be the like of the Dalai Lama. So the Dalai Lama could be brought in.
Great.
Or it could be the parish priest. For some, that would work a treat. Others, it would be the worst thing you could do.
Okay.
If they've had a bad experience with a parish priest in the past.
Yeah. And can I just add one quick note? In this man now was 70, but he had this experience with it when he was doing this healing on somebody, where all this peace came over the room, and then he looked to his left and he saw these 2 silver beings standing in the room, and one of them had his hand over his hand. And for a minute, he just felt this beautiful feeling of love. But then his mind kind of kicked in. He said, oh, fuck this, whatever. And then it just left. So it's like he's trying to get that feeling back and get that connection back.
And in those circumstances, have you tried helping him reconnect that memory at all, Mary?
No, I haven't thought of that, or what, just bring him back to the memory, or
Yes, because for the way you're describing that, it sounds like a very adaptive experience, because he felt something then, and this silver-like figure, whatever it might be. So you could invite him to connect back to it, and just feel a bit of what he felt at the time. So not putting any pressure on him to feel it all, but just, well, with a calm, safe state, for example, or any sort of imagery like that, we're asking the client to bring up the picture and noticing the image that's there. And can you describe what you're aware of? Well, the image is there. And what about the temperature in the room? Lighting additions, sounds, smells. So we're inviting the client to link into those sensory aspects of that adaptive memory, and then just building it up from there. And then as the client connects to it, then if he's feeling the positive response in his body, then you could then invite him to give it a word or a phrase, pairing that with it, so that whenever he says the word or phrase, or even a physical symbol or signal, like squeezing together the thumb and forefinger, by just doing that, he might get this sense of inner peace and spirituality. If you're able to get him to connect to it, because basically what we're doing is classical conditioning. And you may remember part 1 of your EMDR training when we said EMDR is integrative. You'll see things you're already familiar with. So things like that, but they can safe state as classical conditioning, resource and enhancement, and resource development and installation. That's classical conditioning as well. But we're using imagery to get the client to link to some more adaptive experience.
Brilliant. Great. Thank you so much.
Super. I think we may have a question in the chat. Let's just have a look here. And Karen's asking, with parts work, any tips on a user-friendly way to introduce the concept of parts or tools to use to aid processing? Well, I suppose the important thing would be, let me just open this out a bit. When I would be speaking to clients about parts work, I would say that we all have different parts, and I'm not talking about arms and legs and heads. So different parts, different ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. And depending on the situation we're in, then we have a certain way of thinking, feeling, and acting. So for example, when you're in work, there's a way you think, the way you behave. When you're out with your pals, then there's a different way of thinking and behaving when you're there as well. When you're in a pleasurable moment with your partner, again, there's a different way of thinking, feeling, and acting. And as long as the way we're thinking, feeling, and acting is appropriate for the situation we're in, things work out fine. And as we go through life, we develop ways of thinking, feeling, and acting depending on the situation we're in. And sometimes then we could be learning at a young age, this is how we think, feel, and act in a particular situation. It becomes ingrained. And once it's stuck there, neural pathways are developed. And then in response to similar situations later on in life, those same neurons fire in a particular order, generating the child's way of thinking, feeling, and acting, which was appropriate for when we were the child, but as an adult, with different choices that we can make, different circumstances in our lives, it could be a recipe for disaster. I had a client one time, a prime example of that, who was a barrister. And there he was up in court wearing the wig and the gown, doing his stuff, and it is for a performance that they do. And suddenly he switched to a child's way of thinking, feeling, and acting. So he felt childlike. Now, the child part of him hadn't been to university, knew nothing about law, and certainly knew nothing about how to present a case in court as a barrister. So he realized what had happened, and then he sat down. So he couldn't progress his case while he was in that child state, but he switched back into the adult state later. But he realized this can't happen to me again. And that's why he came to seek therapy. So that particular child state kicked in in response to whatever the trigger was at that particular time. And he, as the adult then, couldn't think, feel, and act in the appropriate way. Now, so before I told you about the barrister, I wouldn't be giving the client that example, but I'd be giving that sort of precursor to the different parts. And I would then say, what we need to do is try and get in touch with the parts of you that have these particular ways of thinking, feeling, and acting that aren't appropriate for you, the adult. And we will try and see if there are ways we can help them find other things to do instead. So that's basically what we're trying to do, find roles that are appropriate. Now, the thing about these different states, they have particular ways of thinking, feeling, and acting. Many have particular roles that they will protect. We may have a child state that is a protector, that try to protect the child in a certain way. We may have an adult state that is a protector, that tries to help protect our client as in an adult way. But the two could be in conflict with each other because the way the child is going about protecting is totally at odds to the way the adult part of them would go about protecting. And so there could be conflict between the two. There could be other parts there that are peacekeepers trying to prevent the conflict between the two of them. There may be a part that none of the other parts like. So what needs to happen or needs to change for the other parts to be accepting of this particular part that they don't like? So there's a good book, actually, which some of you who are familiar working with parts, then what I'm saying makes a lot of sense. Others might be going, what's he talking about? There's a good book, which is a good introduction to working with different states, and it's called Ego States, Theory and Therapy. That's Ego States, Theory and Therapy. The authors are Watkins and Watkins, and it's 1997. I think it's still in print, I believe, and it's published by Norton. So it's a very good book. It was recommended to me way, way back in time, and I read it. And the first half of the book is couched in psychodynamic theory, which gives you a good understanding about what's behind it, about energy shifts as well. But the second half of the book was set in a way that it gave case transcripts. So if you're anything like me, and you're reading through it, you could feel as if you're the therapist in that. So I was reading through it, almost living the role of therapist with this client, responding whatever way. And by just reading that through a few times, I got comfortable with that idea. And when it came to work with my own clients, things started to flow. It made sense. So that is a very good book to get started on. There is another good book, working with complex clients, and it's called Coping with Trauma-Related Dissociation. That's Coping with Trauma-Related Dissociation. And it's Van der Hart, Boone, and Steele are the authors. Van der Hart, H-A-R-T, and Boone, Suzette Boone, and Kathy Steele. It's Steele with an E. And it's O-N-O, Van der Hart. Or is he two N's? But Ono Van der Hart. Very good book. It's written in a way which clients could read themselves and pick up on various exercises they can do to help ground themselves. For us as therapists, it's a sort of book you can pick up and it doesn't tax your brain to read it. I love books like that. And so whenever I read through it, you could be sitting with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee or just a glass of water and just sipping away and then reading the book, taking things in. So you don't have to struggle to try and understand concepts. It's just laid out so beautifully. Another very good book, and it's not very thick, but it's quite expensive, is EMDR Toolbox. That's EMDR Toolbox. The author of that is Jim Knipe, K-N-I-P-E. Excellent book, and lots of tips about working with the inner child and working with much more complex client presentations. So certainly recommend any of those three. See, there may be another question in the chat here. Lee's asking about working with individuals with multiple parts. Do we need permission from all the parts to engage with processing? Well, what I would say is that when we're working with somebody who is having the different parts, the associative parts, then you would need to be spending a significant amount of time working with them to get the different parts on board before we do any reprocessing. Because if you were to start too soon, then you may get resistance from some of the parts and they might actually sabotage it. If that's the case, then we've gone too fast and jumped ahead too quickly. I would bring things back and then connect with the different parts to get agreement. So that would be the ideal thing. And I suppose a way of thinking about the parts work. Imagine an old-fashioned stagecoach. And we've got horses tethered loosely to it, and they're pulling in different directions. Some might even be pushing against each other, and it's going nowhere. At best, stagecoach doesn't go anywhere. Worst, you could do damage to it. But if we got those horses, let's say it's 6 horses, and got them harnessed so they all pull in the same direction, the power of the 6 horses together is greater than 6 individual horses. We've got the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. Now, you may have heard that before, but it wasn't me who coined that term. It's a gestalt we're talking about, isn't it? The whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So if we can get them all working together for the benefit of the whole person, then that's great. So let's see, there may be another question here, and see there's a few hands up too. Let's look at this question. And Joanne is asking, there seem to be a lot of protocols that are changing the standard protocol. And Joanne saying, since training, I use the standard protocol with the majority of my cases with good effect. And I guess my question is, well, so Joanne, your question is, do you want to ask it?
Yeah, I was just thinking, hi, Mike. Yeah, I suppose, I think on the EMDR UK forum, there seems to be a lot of obviously splitting of international EMDR, and then there's the UK, and I'm feeling confused, and I'm obviously going to stick with my standard protocol because, I mean, I don't, do you know what I mean? But I'm confused, and I'm just getting a bit like, well, what is actually happening in the EMDR world? I know we've gone off topic a bit, but like, I suppose that there seems to be more and more protocols coming out for different conditions. But my understanding when we did the training was that, you know, utilizing the standard protocol get all your resourcing in, and obviously once you've got your detailed history, which you get during the sessions anyway, I'm becoming more familiar with that. But that, I suppose, is what is the question? Yeah.
Should you stick to the standard protocol?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. And I'll explain why. And there are, I think there's 3 volumes I call scripted protocols, scripted EMDR protocols. And you could read through it and say, oh gosh, all these different protocols, how can I remember them all? If you've learned the standard protocol and you put it into practice, you can work with any condition. That's the bottom line. Now, sometimes there'll be slight variations to the standard protocol, but everything, all of them should remain true to the protocol they call EMDR and or EMDR with a particular population. Now, for example, EMDR working with children, then we change things slightly because we say to the adult, bring up a picture in your mind that represents the worst part. The child, draw a picture or set it up in the sand tray, or whatever they might do, or set up puppets. And then with the negative and positive cognitions, we self-referencing, present-centered, and generalizable for an adult. For a child, depending on what age they are, then teacher doesn't like me, teacher does like me. Not ideal, but better than nothing. Or a very young child, negative, positive cognitions, they're not going to work.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
And,
I understand.
and emotions, well, they might be able to pick out a picture, ask an adult, they might tell you what the emotion is. The child points to a face on a card. Where do you feel in your body? Playful, moving the maybe a magnifying glass word, beep, 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 head, heart, stomach, something like that.
So the creative aspects you can
yes,
bring in on any level.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but I guess the standard protocol is because I use creative methods for even my clients, for them to understand what I mean. So yeah, you're right. I guess it's just confusing when
it is very, and whenever I was some time ago, whenever I was reading all the things that come up on the chat line thing, then I was chipping in, here we go again. I felt like a broken record going on, and other trainers were saying, Michael, you're just right doing that and saying it, but they weren't doing it. I was the only one who was bothering my backside to do it, but I haven't done it in a long time now. But with the standard protocol, the EMDR Europe sets the training standards, and they say it has to be based on Francine Shapiro's book, which it is, and that teaches the standard protocol. And any particular condition that we're working with that varies slightly, it has to be true to the standard protocol. So say, for example, we're working with addictions and somebody's got a strong urge. We can use the urge reduction protocol. Yeah. So with urge reduction, then we would ask the client, bring up a picture of getting ready to do that behavior. And Michael Hass's study, it was problem drinker, so it's getting ready to have the drink. But it might be just the same, by the same token, it might be ready to cut or burn themselves, or to rip open a packet of cakes and eat the cakes, or stuff themselves with chocolate. So it's not actually doing the behavior, it's getting ready to do it. So we've got the picture and negative and positive cognitions as we know them, and the VOC as we know it. As with the picture in your mind and that negative cognition linked together, what emotion do you notice now? So that sounds familiar, doesn't it? And then instead of how disturbing 0 to 10, it's how strong is the urge 0 to 10. 0, no urge at all. 10 is the strongest urge possible. And where do you feel it in your body? So bring up that picture, those negative words, notice that feeling in your body, go with that, and add in the bilateral stimulation. So we go with whatever comes up with the client. And what does happen is that we get a reduction in the urge to do that particular behavior. And Hass's study was a randomized controlled trial, and superbly done, and demonstrated that there was a reduction in urge pre to post, but also at follow-up as well. And there was a control group. So compared to control group, their urges stayed pretty much the same, even at follow-up. Whereas the EMDR, which is treatment as usual, plus that urge reduction protocol, their urges reduced. So that was very good. And if we were working with other particular populations, then we would just follow the standard protocol. So then don't be frightened, Joanne, or any of you, don't be frightened by thinking, oh my goodness, I'll never remember all these. Just put your focus on learning the standard protocol, stick to that, and you will be able to work with any presenting issue. If you think, here's what the client has gotten here and now, what has happened in the past that has led to them having these difficulties in the here and now? And we can work out a treatment plan. What does this client need to create enough stabilization to be able to go there to reprocess those disturbing memories? So once the client is ready, you can target those memories for reprocessing. So that was a good question, Joanne. I'm glad you asked.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
that does come up from time to time, and others may be thinking, did Joanne ask that? Because I was getting put off and wondering, how much more do I need to know?
Yeah,
Thank
you.
Scripted protocols, you can learn a lot from them, but basically, if you look at it, even though they talk about the condition, symptoms, and everything else, there's a lot of background to it. But it's the standard protocol they're talking about.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.
Super. And we've got a question from Paul, then Mike, and then I think there may be one in the chat, but we'll take Paul's question.
Thank you, Michael. Hello there, and nice to see you again.
And you too.
I was wondering if I could ask you a research-based question, if possible.
If I can answer it, I shall. I may be able to direct you somewhere to find out if I don't know the answer.
It kind of, it's not a million miles away from the comment you were just talking to then about that lady. So what I've been doing is I've been using the standard protocol with military veterans, and I've done it on a number of occasions now. And lo and behold, despite what's implied in the NICE guidelines, EMDR does work with former soldiers who've experienced combat-related trauma.
It does.
Does indeed. We've spoken about this about a year or so ago. So what I've done is I've written up a case study of 2 soldiers who I've worked with, and I've got some feedback from them, and I'm hoping to, well, I'm going to submit this to a journal in the hope that I can get this published and get it out there and hopefully start a conversation about, at least in our country anyway, that, you know, EMDR does in fact work with combat-related trauma. One of the kind of criticisms I've had early on is that, oh, you know, a case study is not enough. You need to do a much bigger piece of research than that, which I'd like to do. And this is the kind of question I was going to ask you, really. If I wanted, or if anybody else indeed wants to, how can I put this, nail this down and show, look, EMDR does work with people who've experienced combat-related trauma. You know, I've worked with soldiers, I've worked with people who served in the RAF, I've worked with people who served with the United Nations. So if I wanted to nail this in a bigger study, so for example, I use the impact of event scale, just as you taught me. Every now and then I think an anger scale would probably be quite useful, because sometimes people do report anger. Similarly with anxiety. And I was thinking, you know, maybe 6-12-month follow-up. What do you think would be the kind of things that we need to measure, and over what kind of follow-up periods do you think would nail this?
Well, certainly the PTSD score would be useful. Anxiety as well, which would be probably subsumed by the PTSD
score.
But certainly for some people looking at it, if you say, well, here's the anxiety measure, pre-anxiety measure, post, that makes sense to them. And if there's a hint of symptoms of depression, pre and post, because what you'll find is that there was a study done a while back there, which with PTSD, not necessarily a military population, but somebody with PTSD, people with PTSD who had also symptoms of depression, and the symptoms of depression lifted spontaneously. So that in itself is good to have. But I think certainly the case series is useful. Any time that in the past we've talked about research in EMDR, said yes, the randomized controlled trial is the way to go, but a case series is good to get things into the literature. And so certainly publish it, get it published. And there's the EMDR Journal of Practice and Research, which you probably take it, but somebody who's not outside the EMDR world probably won't go near it. But if it's published in a military journal of sorts, or treatment of military personnel or occupational type journal, then it'll get people, oh, here, what's this? And certainly in the article, you could make reference to the fact that of the NICE guidelines working with combat trauma. But one of the things it says at the start of the DSM is that if the clinician feels it's appropriate to use a particular therapy and basically can stand over and it works, then by all means do it. So what it does say, if you recall, I suppose we probably have read it inside out, Paul, but for others who are not that familiar with it, when it comes to combat trauma, it says start off with trauma-focused cognitive therapy. If it doesn't work, you could try EMDR. So my contention would be, well, if it's saying try EMDR, if the other doesn't work, why not just use EMDR in the first place?
Yes.
But there is a reason that the trauma-focused cognitive therapy got the nod over and above. It's because the amount of research that's been done to date anyway. So a lot of money has been thrown into trauma-focused therapy and particularly in the United States, to the detriment of EMDR. And I suppose in some ways, I heard it said that there's political reasons that would be done as well. Who knows who, and that's where the money has gone. Whereas with EMDR, we all know that it does work with post-trauma symptoms. It does work with military veterans. It works with police as well. But think of it this way. Let's say we've got a police officer, a firefighter, somebody who's ex-military, and they've got symptoms of PTSD. All those boxes are ticked. So they've got a diagnosis of PTSD, and it says don't use EMDR as the first line. But if you were to untick one of the boxes, they no longer have PTSD. They've got an adjustment-like disorder with prolonged duration of more than 6 months without prolonged duration of the stressor, which is one of the DSM-5 categories. So does that mean you can't use EMDR? Well, it doesn't say you can't use it for that. It says in the NICE guidelines, it says don't use it for military PTSD. So then if you use it for this lesser disorder and it works, well, so be it. But either way, it's a collection of symptoms. It's a diagnosis with a collection of symptoms. And if they don't have all those symptoms, they don't have the disorder, but it doesn't mean they're not suffering. And the thing to remember about EMDR therapy, it's about targeting a particular experience or experiences that are stored maladaptively and creating difficulties for the client in the here and now, because it colors the perception of the situation they're in, it affects their attitude, and then to that situation, and then their behavioral response. So by targeting those particular past events, it helps them reprocess, get stored away in time and space. So doesn't then feed into the present to color how they see the situation. It allows them to have a different perspective on what they're facing in the here and now. It allows them to have a different attitude towards it, and then having an alternative behavioral response. I know by saying this to you, Paul, probably the rest of you as well, I'm speaking to the converted because you know EMDR works. But for those who are out there, we do need to influence them. Now, I would say do get it published, Paul, and keep working on it. If you can do it with 2 people, 3 people, all the better. But in EMDR UK, there is a body there that they'll be able to guide you and support, and if you wanted to sort of move forward to do a larger scale study and help coordinate it. And so I think it would be well worth doing. I think there's a prof in Newcastle, I think he may have moved, but he was looking after the research side of things. And is it Ian? I can't remember his name now, but I know that some time ago they've been asking, like, anybody who wants to do some research, we are here to help. So they'll be willing to work with you and to support you and then encourage that to move forward.
Thank you for that. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, so that's good. So any questions arising from that about working with military or first responders? Well, I've seen Mike's got his hand up there, but we'll come to Mike in just a moment. Okay, so we'll take Mike, we'll take your question then.
Yeah, I'm conscious we haven't got much time. I'm very new to it.
I'll overrun, Mike, so
all right.
Folks can get away at 5:30 if they want, but I'll run on to 1:45 if people want that.
I don't know if it's a stupid question, but it's my first. I've just done my EMDR with yourself. It's my first case. I sort of picked this girl because I thought it was quite simple. She's 18. I think she's got quite fixed core beliefs about being unlovable. She's in a relationship now. I think those beliefs are messing it up, really. I think she constantly questions whether he loves her, but I think he does. How does it? Do you think it will work? Do you think EMDR will work for this girl?
Well, in those circumstances, yes, potentially. So we think about there's this girl in a relationship, and does he love me? Does he love me? And of course she's going to doubt it because I'm unlovable and all those other negative thoughts that she has about herself. So we're thinking about what has happened in the past that has led to her having this perception of the situation she's in. He's going to dump her and everything else. So we trace the client's history right away back to the start. And we ask, take a detailed history. That's the important thing, from conception up to the present. And growing up at home, what about relationships in the family? And a question I do ask, what was the relationship with your mom like? And often get the answer from the client, it was grand, or it was all right. Which isn't really qualitative in any way, is it? What I say then is, well, if you were upset about anything, would mom have been there with a hug for you? No, she wasn't a particularly huggy person. I would ask about the relationship with dad, and might find that dad gave hugs. Maybe dad didn't. Maybe there was no dad there at all. Or maybe there were a number of different dads over the period of years. Maybe other kids from other fathers. So we may have found that granny was involved. So I do ask those questions to see were the childhood needs met in terms of love and attention. So I'm looking for acts of commission and acts of omission as well. And we could maybe have somebody referred to us. They've been seen by the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist has written an excellent history report to the GP. And childhood was unremarkable. They may have said in the letter, and that certainly could be the case in terms of big T trauma. But in terms of smaller T events, then there could be a heck of a lot there. So it's like a number of stones lying there, and you can see the stones, which is the psychiatrist is seen. But then our job then as the therapist with the adaptive information processing model in mind is to turn the stones over, see what's underneath them. So those smaller T experiences could be maybe criticisms when they didn't do things very well, and praise not given when it should have been given. We also look at relationships. So let's say going through school, a client then tries to fit into a group and they don't want anything to do with it, or even moving home a number of times, going to different schools, arriving in a new school where friendship groups are already formed, and our client tries to fit in, but they get dismissed, chased away. So what negative belief might they develop about themselves? Maybe I don't fit in, or I don't belong. I'm unwanted. Whenever it comes to maybe a relationship later, maybe teens interested in a particular guy or girl, whatever it might be, and then they get embarrassed by the other person in front of others. I'm unlovable. Could be the meaning that has, tapping into what they already believe about themselves. So these particular experiences then, working out what has happened in the past, if we're able to cluster them, Mike, all the better. So criticisms by mother, beatings by father, bullied in school or excluded by other kids at school, and humiliation by the teacher in school several times, they're all clusters. And then there could be maybe a number of failed relationships or abusive relationships in adulthood, where there is, let's say, emotional abuse, in which case we could cluster them. Those I treat them as problematic relationships as the title of the cluster. And they're all potential targets for therapy. Now, before you would get to that, then the calm, safe state is something we would teach the client, but you'll be using your judgment when you're working with your client. How wide of a window of tolerance does the client have? And also, where is the client on this continuum of complexity, from well-adjusted here, the most complex client presentation here? And so the thing to bear in mind is the further down the continuum of complexity we go, then the window of tolerance gets narrower. So it's a wide window here, it's narrower and narrower, to very narrow for the most complex client presentation. Clients down here, we will be spending time significant amount of time probably in the preparation phase, widening that window of tolerance sufficiently so that we can start considering working with the clients in terms of the reprocessing. So with the client you have in mind, I suppose the bottom line, Mike, is yes, EMDR can be very effective there, but work out your target plan. If you think back to what you did on your training, then what's the presenting issue? Then you identify that. And with your client, provide your client is, let's say, between here and here on the continuum of complexity. I would use the float back to identify a number of past events that are related to it. Now, the thing about the float back, and some of you have a lot of experience and knowledge of EMDR, and then this may sound, Michael, I already know that, but the thing is others have less knowledge. But with the float back, what we're doing is tapping into the feeling state related to the recent experience. And because memories are stored by association, we use that feeling state here to connect to other similar memories back in time, right back to the very start. So we can use that, and then that helps inform our target treatment plan. We also take that detailed history that could put more meat on the bones in terms of the targets that you're working on. But so you work out your treatment plan, you ensure that the client has a wide enough window of tolerance and is able to stay with 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the past. Okay, so does that help at all?
Yeah, I don't want to talk about individual case too much, but so I'll be quiet and let someone else speak.
Okay. So what I was trying to do is give a general answer that would fit with that client plus others as well. So, okay. So yeah. See, we've got.
Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a question from Lorna.
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to ask a question about the float back, if that's okay.
By all means.
And just when you do the float back according to what's in the manual, it talks about floating back from the most representative or resonant example of the presenting issue. And there's been some confusion, I think, in my own EMDR specialist supervision that I have around what that means, whether that, and I just wondered if you could speak to that in terms of whether that means floating back from the memory of a recent traumatic experience, or floating back from the most representative example of the issue that the person has come to therapy for, which of course might be related to the trauma. I hope I make sense there.
Yes, well, it could be either, because whenever the client comes in, I ask, what's the difficulty you're experiencing in the here and now? So we hear what that is, and can you think about when's the last time that happened for you? This is the recent example. So I would tend to go with that. But if it's something that happens a lot every day, I'd say, well, what sort of represents it for you? Well, it happened this morning. Well, would that be representative? Yeah. And it could be that look on his face or her face or something that was said. And as you look into that, so it's tapping into a fairly recent experience, whether it's a representative example of it or the last time it happened. But we want to tap into the feeling state associated with it, because we'll be tapping into the same thing, basically. The image that's there to activate it, the negative belief that goes with it, the emotion and the feeling in the body. And by tapping into that feeling state, then we are looking for times in the past where they've had similar feelings, thoughts, emotions, and feelings in the body to a more recent example. And because the memories are stored by association, doing that float back then should be able to connect to it. Now, one of the things which it's sort of a bit of a tangent really from what you were asking there, Caroline, is that whenever we do the float back, the client might go straight back to the touchstone memory. And I see this often in trainings, whenever the people would link into the more recent example, next time they're at the touchstone memory. But let's say the recent example happened at age 35, touchstone memory happened at age 5. So there's 30 years in between. So nothing happened between age 5 and age 35. I wonder. So what would you do then?
You'd ask them to go forwards.
Absolutely, Lorna. Because I was going to say, would you like me to tell you? But Lorna has just let us. Okay, because I may have said, would somebody like to hazard a guess? And Lorna would have been straight in there. So we'll give you a gold star for that one, Lorna, I think. So thanks. So absolutely. So and so they can see there, Lorna knew exactly what to do there, and that's what I would do as well. So well done, Lorna.
That's great, thank you. So so for example, somebody who'd experienced something upsetting in the course of their work, something quite traumatic, and then as a result of that, in similar work-related situations, they are experiencing a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry and feeling quite overwhelmed with anxiety. You would be floating back from the most representative recent experience of the feeling overwhelmed with anxiety.
Yes, indeed. And so the thing is, we may go back and it may be similar situations, very similar situations the whole way back, or it may tap into something which seems totally different, but
Yeah.
it is connected because the seed was sown. And what I talk about on the part 1 training, you may recall, is that at some point there's a little acorn gets planted. And you think about the size of an acorn, it's only about that size. But if an acorn lands in the right sort of soil, and there's enough nutrients in the soil and water, and it germinates, and then a little shoot appears, then it becomes a sapling, a small tree, and a much bigger tree. Of course, as we know, the acorn grows into an oak tree, and over time, it can become huge. Similarly with our clients, with this huge oak tree of problems that they've got in the here and now that affect their problem, create these problems in daily living. Where does it come from? A little acorn. So we're wanting to identify the different branches and leaves that are there as we go down and arrive at the acorn eventually.
That's helpful. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you. So Caroline, does that answer the question, or is it did it go off in too much of a tangent?
Do you mean me, Michael? It was my question.
No, oh sorry, no. Oh sorry, yes, it was Lorna, because you put the hand down, and I just saw Caroline with a hand up there, and I thought it was the same question. So sorry.
But it does, yes. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much, Lorna. Thank you. Okay, so Caroline, we'll take your question. There's a few things in the chat, and there may be questions or it may just be a comment, but we'll take your question, Caroline.
Thanks, Michael. It's maybe on the back of that. So I have a client who had a very traumatic experience a couple of years ago, and is very triggered in the present because people didn't believe her. So she's a feeling of being judged. And I floated back, and there's actually she's history of bullying, and there's several other times in her life where she's been judged, but she minimizes those experiences and isn't particularly interested in feeling that they're relevant, kind of really just wants to deal with the here and now, being triggered in the present day, and kind of feels silly doing the calm place, feels silly doing, she's just kind of mortified to feel that that's relevant to our past experiences. And I'm just wondering, is it beneficial I just deal with the present situation, even though she's probably, if I did that, stuff in the past will come in. I just still want to keep her engaged, you know.
Oh, absolutely. I can understand that. I think a lot has to do with the psychoeducation, because whenever a client comes in, then I'd be asking what's the difficulty you've got in the here and now. So get that description. And then if I get a feel, usually within a few minutes, where the client is in this continuum of complexity, and then I may choose then to do the float back at that stage. So let's say I would say to the client, what did you think about that recent experience? And can you think of a recent time it happened? And what negative belief about yourself goes with it? The emotion, the feeling, the body. So just hold together those words, that I'm not good enough, that emotion, whatever it is, and the feeling in your body, hold them together, float back in your memory, and just noticing if any earlier memory comes to mind. Just be aware of anything that comes up and let me know. And yep, and what's come up for you? And what age was that? Let's float back a bit further with that negative belief, that emotion, that feeling in your body. Be aware of anything else that comes up. Float back further. And then next thing, bing, 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 all these different things come up. And say to the client then, so you might be wondering why I was asking you about linking into this recent experience. Next thing, you've talked about all these past experiences where, I was wondering what that was about. So it's about the way that memories are stored, because whenever disturbing events occur, the brain tries to process them. Sometimes it's successful, but often it isn't. And whenever it isn't, those experiences become locked in the brain, stored in what we call a memory network. Let's say a memory network looks like a hand. The fingers represent channels of information which are associated with each other. They all link together to form this memory. And they get stored there. And It means that whenever we go through life, we draw on what we've learned about ourselves, what's stored in these memory networks to make sense of the situation we're in. So these feed into the present, color our perception, affect our attitude, and then our behavior. Then as we go through life and have other experiences which are similar in some way, such as you doing that flow back and connecting to it, we have it here. It links into previous experiences, which then inform this, and then they link together. And then we have a later experience, and they link together. So as we go through life, all these experiences which are similar all connect together. And it means it feeds into your present reality to affect how you see the situations today. It affects your perception of that, your attitude, and then your behavioral response. Now, in order to resolve this present day issue that you'd like to resolve, my feeling is we need to go back to those early memories to reprocess those first. Because if we do that, then we get a generalization effect. And when it comes to that more recent experience, it'll resolve much more quickly. So when I explain it like that to the client, they're on board with the idea. But then if there's, but yes, but I appreciate that, but I want to deal with this. Well, okay, we can start at that point. But what I would say to you is, as we do the reprocessing, what might happen is you might link back to those early experiences, and then we can go with them as they come up. Yeah, okay. Or what might happen is we could start working on the more recent one, and it gets to a certain point, but won't go any further. It's sitting here chronologically, these early experiences feed into it, and it could prevent it from fully reprocessing. All right, if that happens, we need to park this and go to the earlier ones. Okay, Michael. So that's the way I would work with clients and have done whenever this. I'm doing it this way. I want to start. So I'm not going to fall out with them, but I tell them, here's what can happen. Here's a way of handling it. So, okay. Radio. So it might be a question in the chat here. Let's have a quick look. Okay. So if you just have this slip off at half past, let's see if there's anything. Yes, there is. Karen has a question. How long in general do you find psychoeducation preparation resourcing takes with complex clients, complex PTSD parts work? I work in NHS secondary care. There can be pressure to get measurable recovery within 24 sessions, only offering episodes of care. I try to present the case for longer term work with this client group. And the thing is, 24 sessions for clients way down here really are just starting. And trying to create that stability could be taking 20 sessions in itself before you're starting to get somewhere. I've worked with clients who've been round about here, and certainly in the early days of my experience with EMDR, at 22 sessions with a client who's round about here, and that did her. But for a client who's down here, I have one currently who's dissociative identity disorder, who functions very well as a healthcare professional, and we're still doing parts work. I'm trying to move things on and working on present triggers. I widen the window of tolerance sufficiently that I'm able to work on present triggers using EMD to keep her contained, but also then working with different parts as well. And when we're working with the complex clients, let's say we've done enough work for a complex client, we've widened the window of tolerance a bit. We've used EMD on a recent past event or a present trigger so that it can keep the client managing that situation, or helps keep them contained in that situation. And then we may be able to go back to do more stabilization, and then more resourcing as well. And then perhaps working on another trigger, perhaps with enough stabilization, then going back to working some reasonably manageable past event, something that doesn't seem or appear to be connected to the horrendous trauma that they've undergone in the past. So certainly I'd say when you're given these extremely complex clients, then 24 sessions isn't going to cut it. That would be the bottom line. So, any, I suppose we've time for maybe one last question. Okay, well, I think that's probably us for today, folks. Now, I'm going to run another Q&A in 4 weeks' time, actually, so I'll let you know about that, and I'll send out word later this week. I think all of you have signed up for the newsletter, so there's another one coming out on Wednesday morning, so you can watch out for that. And I can't remember what it was about. I know it's number 4, but I can't remember now what it's about. And so it means now that this one's coming out, I'll have to write the next one. And I have a plan, believe it or not, so that's a good sign. And so I'll get that worked out hopefully this week, and then you'll be able to get that in 2 weeks later. I think Lee's got a question. Let's just have a quick look, and then that will probably round us off then. Let's just have a look. So Lee's asking, do you have any documents about the length of time treating very complex cases? I suppose that the only thing I could say is how long is a piece of string, because it will depend very much on the client you're seeing. So everything has to be client-led in terms of what they need, because some even clients who may, on the face of it, may seem as if they're given the trauma they have. Complexity is about the difficulties the client has got in the here and now, not necessarily what has happened to them. But the important thing would be ensure the client is stable enough. Ultimately, what we're wanting to do in terms of the EMDR reprocessing is have our clients in a position where they could have 1 foot in the present, staying grounded in the here and now, and being able to connect to the past memories and stay with 1 foot in the present, 1 foot in the past, in order to do the reprocessing. If you think about the clients from the healthy end of the continuum of complexity, they very readily keep 1 foot in the present and 1 foot in the past. That's where we want our more complex ones to be at some stage. If you feel that they're not ready for that yet, but they're able to work on a more recent past event or a present trigger, then they have a wide enough window of tolerance, then you could use the like of EMD. If you're limited in the number of sessions, then you would cut the cloth to suit. So if you've got, let's say, you're told all you're getting is 12 sessions, and very clearly you've done screening for dissociation, the client's got significant dissociative features. You may have done the ACE questionnaire and the client has got 4 or more ACEs, and you're looking at the difficulties they've got in the here and now. In 12 sessions, there's no way I'm going near the early life experiences. I'm thinking about stabilization and all the time that I've got. But whether we've got 12 sessions, 112 sessions, stabilization is what we need initially with the very complex clients. Okay. So I'm sorry I wasn't able to answer that in any more detail. I'm not sure of any other documents, but certainly that book I mentioned, Coping with Trauma-Related Dissociation, is great for creating stabilization. And also that book, EMDR Toolbox, really good as well. So if you haven't got hold of them, they're well worth seeing anyway. You can read parts of them online and see if it will work for you and with the clients you've got. That would be good. And then I mentioned earlier about the course that I'm running, and it'll be, I think it did send out to the newsletter recipients. You got it first before I sent it out to anybody else. So this course on the 19th of April, and whenever I wrote it, put it together, I thought, gosh, I wish I had a course like that myself whenever I was in the early days of working with complex clients. I would have loved to have had it. So I'm actually quite excited about delivering it, because it is different and to something that I've done before. And it would actually be a nice stepping stone coming from doing the standard training about thinking in more detail about complex clients. There's group exercises. I'm giving you a bit of background first of all, then a challenging case, but not overly challenging to think about, and then we'll discuss that. Then from that, then I'll add a bit more teaching to build on that. Then I'll give you a slightly more complex case. Then we discuss that and think about how you handle this case. Then I'll give you a bit more teaching and then give you a real humdinger. But again, by the time you get to that, I've told you about sort of things that you can do, so you will know how to face it. But if I give it to you right at the start, where do you start with this? So it'll get you up to that level, how to consider a case presentation for a very complex case way down here and being able to deal with it. And so it'll be a nice stepping stone to the working with the different parts, which is the course that I'm running later in the year as well. Haven't advertised the date yet, but I would run at least one a year. So usually run it in the autumn time. So anyway, folks, I'll probably remind you of that again, and before I would advertise it to EMDR UK, I want to give people I've trained or who are on my list an opportunity to sign up for it before I would open it up to anybody else. And so think it's only fair because you've worked with me and we have a good relationship working together. And the fact that you're here today shows that you want to progress your practice in EMDR, and I salute you for that. So folks, thanks very much for being here today. As always, I enjoy myself. And as you can see, I didn't know what was coming at me. And again, it's having to think on my feet, but just as you do when you're with your clients, you think on your feet as well about how to handle it. Like whenever I said that situation, Lauren, I come up with the answer just like that, thinking on your feet. So all the best, folks, and I'll be sending you through details of the next Q&A in 4 weeks' time, and I'll maybe see you at that too then. Okay, all the best. Cheers then. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, Michael.
Bye. 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 Bye.